Olajumoke, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Wisdom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Keep up the good work you are doing. It's important that people are educated about the energy sector as a whole.
Yes, we'll try to do our very best, and that's why we're happy to have someone like you who knows quite a lot. And I have many questions for you today. We hope time will even permit us to answer all of them. But I will just start with my very first question. I know as at January or just recently in February, NEC had announced that about 10 states, I think they are up to 11 now, have finally taken, they had their policy created, and they've taken, control of their market. And I'm also aware that just recently we saw the publishing of the National Integrated Electricity Policy and the Nigeria Integrated Resource Plan 2024. We're going to go into all of this, but I want to first ask you now, with the Electricity Act of 2023, and you know that the Electric Power Sector Reform Act of 2025, which of course have then evolved into the new act that we know. What are some of the changes with what we used to have before, what we have now with the new act? If you can give us a refresher on what has changed and what we have seen happen within the market or the sector as it is today.
Okay, thank you, Wisdom. So the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act is called the EPSTRA 2005, was a reform act. The act was put in place to midwife the transition, the privatization transition. The transition from government-owned, state-owned entities to private-owned and managed, entities within the Nigeria electricity supply industry. That is what people call the NESI. Okay. I will try and keep the discussions very simple and easy to understand, because within the power sector, there's a lot of jargon. But so that people can follow us, we'll try and keep the discussions very, very simple.
Yes.
So reform, there was a process. It was agreed that there was a need to privatize. Okay. So the EPSTRA, Electric Power Sector Reform Act, was the document, the enactment, the legislation that, midwife the process. Within that document, you will see how PHCN became the successor distribution companies, successor generation companies, and transmission company of Nigeria. You see how the commission, Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, was formed, and, the process of tariff setting, how tariffs are supposed to be established, So it was focused on, the reform and the early stages of the market also. Now, what we have is, by 2025, that's 20 years. So this is 2025 since that EPSTRA, was enacted. But in 2023, that's 2 years ago, about 18 years after, we had the Electricity Act come into play. So by this time, the reform process had started, had been implemented. You have private sector running, the distribution companies, and most of them, except those that are under, management. You have private ownership of generation companies. It is only the transmission company of Nigeria that is still owned at this point, is owned by the government. So within the Electricity Act, now is this preparation for a full market. The reform process, has been completed. Okay. How do we develop a full, vibrant, viable electricity market? And so within the Electricity Act of 2023, you see increased, mention of investment in transmission networks, in generation, in distribution. There's a lot of call for investment. There's promotion of renewable energy. Yeah. The powers.
I know a chapter was dedicated to talking about renewable energy and what it will mean for the sector.
Absolutely. Then whereas with the EPSTRA, the old law, you had some of the agencies outside. Within the Electricity Act now, you've brought all the agencies. NEMSA is now under, the Electricity Act. So it's supposed to be a comprehensive document that if anybody is wanting to know more about the electricity sector in Nigeria, you should be able to pick up the Electricity Act 2023, and it will give you, enough information, and enough to proceed. Of course, one of the things that is in a key provision within the Electricity Act is the transition to state electricity markets.
Exactly.
So I think it's important to mention here that 2023 was a very interesting year for the electricity sector, energy sector in Nigeria, because two key enactments came into force. The first one is the amendment of the Constitution. Okay. You had already mentioned it, I think, earlier stages of the program, where you talked about the constitutional amendment that allows states to now enact laws for generation, transmission and distribution.
Yes.
Within, as long as it's within their states, now they have the powers, to do so. Previously, there was a limitation where they were restricted to within areas, not covered by the grid. But now, within the states, they have the powers to enact laws. So the State House of Assembly in any of the 36 states has the power to enact laws for generation, transmission, and distribution. So it sounds to me like they are coming of age.
Yes, but if I will come in here now, experts have said that this will be the game changer for the energy sector or the electricity market in Nigeria. This will solve the issue of grid collapse. This will solve the issues of making power available for Nigerians. So I want to further now ask you, how would that indeed happen? Because even before this law was created, states could, they had opportunity of doing much more with off-grid, like solar and all of that. But we didn't see a lot of states take that opportunity. It seems everybody wanted to take full control. What will it change? Or what are the positives we are going to see now that states can create their own laws from transmission, generation, and distribution? What's going to change?
Okay, so let me, what they say during the election, they say, oh, I endorse. So I endorse state electricity markets. Okay. I believe in state electricity markets, and maybe one of those that believe that it would be a game changer. Now, why haven't states done it before? So there was a lot of controversy about what is the area covered by the national grid, what's the area not covered by the national grid. Okay. And then the other thing that you can see is that we've had about 18 years, as at the time this Electricity Act was enacted, and we have the opportunity to assess the performance and the growth of the sector in the 18 years.
That's looking back from 2025, Abby? Looking back from 2005.
Looking back from 2005, yeah. Okay. So how much, growth has taken place? And everything, the regulation of electricity was done at the center, was done at Abuja, so that is where any electricity, you collect your licenses, from electricity. Some states had tried, to do some things, but why I believe it's such a game changer is because the responsibility has been placed on the state governments. And how easy is it to regulate a country of 240 million people, from the center, even though we call ourselves a federation? So, I believe that, with this state electricity markets, with the opportunity to create a state electricity market, now a governor has, the responsibility, he has the powers, to work with the state government, work with the state House of Assembly to design a solution that is fitting, for his citizens. It's now a case of taking your destiny into your own hands. Okay. You don't have to wait and say, oh, it's because Abuja did not do this, that's why I can't provide energy for my citizens. No. Now you have the opportunity to examine what exists, within your state. What are the resources available within your state? Then what is the energy demand within your state? What are the networks that are required to connect that energy demand to the resources available? What kind of generation is required? What off-grid, strategies should you employ? And it's on a smaller scale.
Okay.
It's on a smaller scale. And I believe that because of that and these other reasons, it gives you much more opportunity to succeed than where, 36 states are standing in line. And we've tried it. So we've tried that for 18 years. Let's try something else. I believe that the state electricity markets are a game changer because number one, it's on a smaller scale. Okay. Number two, it gives the state governments the opportunity to solve the unique challenges of their citizens. Now, we are 36 states, but not everything that applies in one state, applies in another. I remember I worked with a distribution company for about 9 years. And one of the things we discovered with that distribution company, which covered 4 areas, is that the demographics, even with those 4 states, are different.
Okay.
So even though there are 4 states, the demographics are different in each of those 4 states. Okay. So it's with the state government, then you have the opportunity, the unique needs of your citizens, and you can provide for that within the law, within the policy. First, within your policy, within the laws, within the regulations, within the public-private partnerships that you build, within the enabling environment that you create and that you allow, incentives to.
So some have said, have we not created 36 problems for ourselves now? You mentioned one of the discos that you had worked with that goes beyond one state. How will those discos work now? Because across 4 states now, before you are dealing with one law or one policy, but now if your disco spans 4 states, you have 4 policies or 4 regulators you are dealing with as a disco. How would they manage that? Is that, or do you see that as a problem, or what was the fixes in the act that solves that problem for them? Secondly, looking at it now, we are going to have, as we go, about 10 states have already created their market. So it means as we go on, soon we might have 36 states, creating their policies and their markets. So it means we're going to have 36 markets to deal with. What happens to NEC at that point in time now? What will be the function of NEC at the end of the day when all 36 states, for example, now have their market? Do you see any disadvantage, or is there anything that worries you in how this will go in the long run?
Okay, excellent question, Wisdom. But the thing is, I have a different perspective. So my paradigm is my perspective, my view, is how can electricity access get to the people?
Okay.
My paradigm and my perspective is not about how will the discos operations function.
Okay.
Because the discos, as I've said, I will still go back to the distribution companies and the fact that since 2013, when privatization took place, most of the distribution companies, came into existence at that time, the privatization. So between then and now, it's 2013 to 2025, it's 12 years.
Yes.
So they've had the opportunity to run those different coverage areas for those that have multiple states within their coverage areas. But we still see, significant losses, across, the distribution companies, in terms of their performance, in terms of their collections. So if something is not working, why don't we look for another way in which it will work? So the first question you asked, which I said was excellent, is that how will it work?
Yes.
Now, the Act has envisaged that problem and instructed within the provisions of the Act that when a state elects to create its own state electricity market, it has some responsibilities. The first one is that it has to enact a law.
Okay.
But even enacting a law of itself is not enough. After enacting the law, it should create the State Electricity Regulatory Commission, what they call the SERCs. So we have NEC, and then we have SERC. So SERC is for state, NEC is for national regulator.
Yeah.
So when they do that, then the state will notify NEC that, we've done this, we've taken these actions, we've equipped our regulator, we want to commence the process of our state electricity market. a copy of this document is also sent, to BPE, sent to the distribution company within that area. And within an agreed time frame, the process of transition starts. One of the things that the successor distribution company covering that area has to do is to incorporate a subsidiary company.
So a subsidiary company from the main company itself.
Yes.
Okay. What we call the subco.
So the subsidiary company, the subco, exactly.
Okay.
So that subco is going to take over the assets. So after creating this subsidiary company or subco,
okay,
it should now delineate to share its assets, prorate the assets into and transfer the assets, the liabilities, the contractual obligations, and the employees that are relevant to that subco. It will now transfer those assets, those liabilities into the subsidiary company.
Okay.
So that subsidiary company is the one that will now be regulated by the SEC, the State Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
That's how it's going to work.
Okay.
Now, some people have said, there are different ideas. This power sector is a very interesting place.
Very, very interesting one, honestly.
Multiple disciplines, multiple ideas. Everybody has different ideas of how they think. Some people felt that why did the law give states the option? Why didn't they just say, to your tents, O Israel, every state, go and create your state electricity market? But in the wisdom of the legislators, they decided that the states should elect, because states are at different stages of development, and one state may be ready, another may not be ready at the same time.
So
as
long,
you said, over 10.
How many more years do you see before, maybe we've had like 10 or 11 states now? When do you see all states, 36 of us, be able to set up our SECs, that's the State Electricity Commissions? How long do you see us getting there?
So there's an interesting, development, with the Nigeria Governors Forum.
Okay.
Where there's a committee of commissioners of energy.
Okay.
And at one of their meetings, they agreed that, they would, all the states should actually enact their laws by May 2025. So it's interesting. It will be interesting to see whether, all the different 36 states will decide to enact their laws.
I doubt that is visible, especially for states that are having, assembly issues, the legislator problems. I doubt May is visible for them.
So, well, just to bring you up to date on what is happening, in this dynamic, sector that we're in. So while, it may pose some challenges, but even the tax-related issues, there is a provision within the Act that says it should not incur, additional tax issues for, the transaction or the process of separation should not incur additional tax issues. So it's going to bring about changes, certainly, in the way the successor distribution company was being run. But I would like to focus more on what will benefit, everybody at the end of the day. So that was your first question.
Yeah.
The second question you asked was, what is the role of NERC? Does NERC, the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, the federal regulator, do they cease to have relevance? No, they don't.
Okay.
They don't.
What then will be their role at the end of the day? What did the law say?
Okay, so what the law says is that states, and the Constitution, is that states have jurisdiction. They have authority. Let me not use a big word.
Okay.
States have authority and power within their boundaries.
Okay.
Now, for any transaction that crosses the boundary of a state, those transactions are regulated by NERC, the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, for example, if a state has created its own state electricity market, but is still buying energy because it's the process of energy security, securing energy, providing energy security within the state, maybe for a generation plant to start generating within the state is still ongoing, is still in the preliminary stages. And so energy still has to be acquired, purchased across the borders. Then the transaction for the purchase of that electricity will be done by NERC.
By NERC.
International transactions also will also be regulated by NERC. Now, why I see this as positive is that now you have 36 states potentially competing. Okay. When states are at different stages of development, but by the time you see the front runners start to provide steady supply, for their citizens, you will start to see businesses move, even to those states where electricity is more stable. You will start to see a change in the rural-urban drifts, where those states that are able to provide reliable energy supply, people are beginning, because it will create, there'll be more jobs, there'll be more
people
employment.
begin to move there more since there's
yes. So I'm very excited, and I fully endorse state electricity markets. While it's not something that you snap your fingers and it happens.
Yes,
There's
a work
lot
in
of
progress
work that is going into the process of developing a viable state electricity market, but we need to do it.
Okay.
It's very important.
So I want to ask you, what is then going to happen to the national grid, what we currently have that is serving the country? What is going to happen to the grid the way it is? And secondly, we know in 2013, the issue of privatization came in that wasn't successful at the end of the day. In the mix of all of this, as states are taking over their market, what role do you see privatization playing at the end of the day as they try to compete for investment and all of that? What is going to happen?
So for the national grid is still owned by the federal government. And there are contracts, there are already existing contracts between successor distribution companies and, embed between successor generation companies. So those contracts are ongoing. That's why when state electricity markets were being created, the law says that the contracts, so when you create the subsidiary company, that subsidiary company is supposed to take over even the contractual obligations, the portion of the contractual obligations that, relates to it as a state. For example, if you have Abuja Electricity Distribution PLC, and Nasarawa decides that, we want to create our state electricity market, then the portion of the contract between AEDC and NBET should be novated, to Nasarawa State. And so the grid, those contracts are being processed, and, the energy is being transmitted through the grid. So the grid will continue, to be the conduit through which those contracts are processed. But there is a lot that needs to be done even about the grid. Because, we saw about 12 grid collapses. I heard you mention was it a grid collapse or grid disturbance?
Because now we hear more of grid disturbance. Yeah. So, we've had two disturbances this year, and they say it's not grid collapse. So I'm not sure what is happening.
Ask the engineers to come and explain to us what is a grid collapse and what is a grid disturbance. But it's important, this is a very, very serious issue that, we're just, trying to make light of. There is a need for an overhaul of the corporate governance processes within transmission. So the issue of investments, what kind of investments, should a transmission company, why should the grid be collapsing? It's not as if other countries don't experience challenges, but they have found ways to ensure that those challenges do not ensure in a blackout for the whole nation. Now, one of the things I know about transmission is they receive different types of funding from different sources. But one thing that is important, one of the many things that is important about transmission is that where you invest there should be a process, of arriving at the decision of where you put a transformer, where, it's not an emotional decision. It's not a social decision. It's a decision of where is the best place, where is the load. You hear of some redundant transformers in areas where they are, they've been installed, while some areas are crying out and they have overloaded, transformers. So that's what I'm saying, that the TCN, if we want to have a transmission grid that is stable, it is important that the governance processes within transmission have to be overhauled. Now, one process that is ongoing now is the separation of the independent systems operator from the transmission services provider. The independent systems operator is the one responsible for determining where energy goes, directing the energy and all. And they also are responsible for issuing invoices and market settlements. Then you have the transmission services provider. They are responsible for providing equipment, transmission equipment, and infrastructure. So that process of separating the two has, begun, and we are expecting to see, information about the finalization of that.
I will just hold you there. We want to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk further on that point you have raised. Of course, I also want to know, is the law only clear on what happens to the DISCO, but what happens to TCN and the GENCOs in all of this mix as the state begin to make their laws? But let's go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. I'm still talking to my guest, who is an energy consultant, Olajumoke Delano, and this is the Energy Outlook. We have been discussing state electricity market, the challenges and opportunities, just trying to break down the law that was passed in 2023 that we have seen now states can generate, transmit, and distribute within their borders at the state level, and what is that going to mean for citizens, and how do they get power 24/7? So I still have Jumoke with me. Jumoke, I hope you can still hear me. So my question, yes, my question now, before we went on break, was what happens to TCN and then the GENCOs? We are now clear what's going to happen to the DISCOs. They are going to form a subco for their areas where they cover when the laws are made. But what's going to happen to TCN and what's going to happen to the GENCOs? Because they also play critical roles in what happens and how energy gets to the last mile. What did the law say about these two?
Okay, so the interesting thing about the Electricity Act is that, there is a lot of opportunity for investment. I will speak to TCN now. The law promotes the use of public-private partnerships in transmission, promotes investments, in transmission. There's actually a regulation called Investments in Transmission in Electricity Networks, which has to do with transmission and also distribution. So whilst those regulations are there, the important thing is for any investor wanting to invest in any of these sectors, they want to know where they are getting their money from. Okay. So there's opportunities, and the issue of state electricity markets, why it does not impact so directly on generation companies, is that a generation company is located in a particular state. Usually they are located in one state. Okay. So, but they send their energy to the grid. Okay. We are going to see an increase in bilateral transactions. Between states? So as states' electricity markets, develop, as states create their own laws, create their policies, and start to tackle the issue of energy security, you would see opportunities for those subsidiary companies or even new distribution utilities within electricity states, going into bilateral contracts with generation companies. Okay. For example, there are some states that receive under 100 megawatts. And, if a state receives just under 100 megawatts, that that state is surviving on self-generation. But when you put a framework in place that is attractive to investors, then you can have generation companies deciding that they want to build a generation plant in a particular state that has an attractive investment climate, has an enabling environment, has ease of doing business, that I would like to build, a generation plant here in order to meet the energy needs of the state. Now, the other thing is that apart from meeting the energy needs of a state can meet its energy security, its needs, but then there's also the opportunity for export. Exports from that state to another state and exports internationally. So there's still opportunity, for the generation companies, the transmission company. There are still those opportunities. But I think that my opinion is that the opportunities have increased. Because as I said, if a state is receiving 70 megawatts, 100 megawatts in, what can a state do with that? It just shows you that that state is existing on self-generation, which is even more expensive than the cost of, generating, creating your own state electricity market and, having energy security for your citizens.
Okay. I'm not sure if you have been able to read or view some of these state policies. And my next question is, if you have, how will the state or are the states planning to solve these other issues, like one, metering, secondly, the cost of the energy? In Lagos here, I'm on band A. This month alone, today is the 14th, I've spent over 50,000 naira, for my house to buy power. That's a lot of money. The end of the month is not already here. So people want to know the issue of metering, the issue of band A or band B. People want to know how will this change as now that the states are taking control over it. As a user of power, I'm thinking, why is it not possible for me to switch from one subco to another subco if I wish? How will all of this be handled by the state policies, if you've been able to cite any, especially for states like Lagos and other states? What's going to happen in these policies at this point?
So a good point that you've raised. So the issue of metering is critical to any state that is creating its state electricity market.
Because it seems like the biggest issue unsolved currently, the issue of metering seems like the biggest issue unsolved.
So when I like to talk about metering, in a broader perspective, right?
Okay.
Because metering, when people talk about metering, usually what they talk about is consumer metering. How can I get the meter? Because that allows me to control my consumption and to know, what ensure that I'm only getting billed for what I enjoy. But there's also other aspects of metering. There's feeder metering, there's transformer metering. There's supposed to be metering across the whole value chain. And what I've seen, in states is the idea of incentives, creating incentives for metering. Incentives, some states are providing metering, but some states are providing an enabling environment that allow, meter providers coming. And that's even part of what you are advising, that create an enabling environment. How much of these equipments are produced locally? Some are produced locally. We have some local meter manufacturers, but mostly we have assemblers. They are assembling, those parts. So if all those items are being imported, then what is supposed to be done, in order to create an enabling environment, at least on the federal level, is that the incentives, the tariffs, and even at the presentation of the electricity policy, National Electricity Policy and Integrated Resource Plan, one of the issues that was raised was the issue of incentives and tariffs, reduction in the tariffs and the taxes on importation of equipment that is required, to have a viable private sector. Metering was one of them. Okay. And so when I talk about metering, I like to say end-to-end metering, then metering infrastructure, there's a lot of manual activities going on at the distribution level. There needs to be an introduction of automation and innovation that allows a distribution company to sit within its offices and be able to strategically determine what are the potential areas where its energy is being stolen. And that you cannot arrive, at that deduction if you don't have equipment, automation, management information systems, advanced metering infrastructure that tell you that this is where my energy is being stolen. What about, some discos have what you call the whistleblowing policy, but Nigerians, I don't know if Nigerians.
But are we going to be out of place if we say the state policy should insist that maybe before a disco can, or a subco, as we will call them now, can give power to a certain area, they must ensure that those people have meters? Is it possible, are we out of place if the law insists that there must be meter before a subco can give energy? Because we're also going to put away this issue of estimated billing. So I'm not sure how these states plan to handle all of this, because it seems like part of the major problem we are currently having with issue, of course, and also how we are getting monies back, how the discos are getting their revenue back and all of that. How do you think that will play out if we insist that there must be meters by the subcos?
So, that is not really new. I'll be honest with you and say that there are NEC regulations that actually speak to this issue of not being able, you are not supposed to connect a new customer without a meter. It's there. It's one of the NEC policies, NEC regulations that talks about metering. But the challenge is that the power sector works in an ecosystem.
Okay.
So before, there was a time where there was meter prices were regulated. Now at national level, they are deregulated. So it's not too much to ask that before you connect me, you must give me a meter. But the issue is, if the price of meter is being regulated and the price, you are pegging the price of the meter to a particular amount, but because of the devaluation of the currency that we saw, since 2023, till now, those prices are no longer competitive. Nobody is going to want to sell a meter. So there are some back, conversations that may not be in the open that impacts the ability to supply meters. Thankfully, the deregulation has, the meter prices have been deregulated. There's a process, that NERC has established now for prices to be updated on a monthly basis.
So you don't know if these state policies are handling all of this. Do you know from the ones you've seen?
So I've reviewed, a couple of state policies. Some of them are still in draft stage. And one of the things that, there's the issue of metering that is covered because it's a critical issue. But those that don't have, it's certainly a recommendation that we are putting across. That metering is critical. It's critical to, the thing is about metering is that some people believe that while I worked in a distribution company, there was this belief that, distribution companies don't want to meter because they want to do estimated billing. But the thing about metering is that it brings transparency and trust between the distribution company.
And helps with revenue collection also.
And helps with revenue collection. Absolutely. Absolutely helps with revenue collection. So it is in the interest of the customer and the interest of the disco for there to be metering.
Okay, so because we are out of time now, I want to talk about the issue of affordability and fairness of access to this electricity at the end of the day, and speak to the issue of Band A and no Band A. With these state policies now, is there still going to be Band A and Band B? What do you see happening?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question you've asked. Okay. But let me explain something that is very important.
In 1 minute, because we are running up out of time.
Okay, in 1 minute. Electricity is not free. It's not free. There's a cost. to putting a kilowatt of electricity in your house, there is a cost to it. So band A currently is the only one paying a cost-reflective tariff. Everybody else is paying a subsidized tariff. So the states that are creating the electricity markets, some of them don't want to do it. Some of them want to revert to the previous residential tariff, commercial tariff, industrial tariff. But some of them don't mind the band A, band B, band C, band D, band E. But I mean, I have both on both sides. Those who want to do, but the thing is that if a state does not do band A, band B, and they insist on cost-reflective tariffs, because the states are insisting that they don't want to carry the burden of a subsidy.
Okay.
So if a state is providing residential tariffs, commercial tariffs, but the tariffs are cost-reflective, it will still come at a price.
Okay.
But the interesting thing about it is that if you have a meter, then you can control your consumption. You can switch off the lights. You know, then there's what is called, there's some states may consider, you know, those that are very poor. So different options are being looked at in order to find
because of time, we'll have to leave it there. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I hope you are promising us that we can get you back again to continue from where we have stopped at another date. Because I would have loved to also go into the energy compact, the national energy compact that was put together because the government is looking at to run the power sector. There are other things that we didn't even touch at the end of the day. There's so much to talk about. We can't even finish all today. But thank you so much, Olajumoke, for the time. And indeed, I appreciate your insight. This has been very informative. As we try to break down some of this, I hope I can get one of the commissioners from one of the states on the program to help us tell us what the state is indeed doing and how things are going to change for their state so that we can understand some of this in better context so that people can know what's indeed going to happen. But thank you so much for the time on the program. We're going to leave it at this, but we'll bring you back. If you promise us, we can get you back another time. So we can continue in this.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Wisdom.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. So that's our program for today because we're indeed running out of time. I mean, if we go on, I'm sure we need another 1 hour. But important conversations we've had today. And as we try to break down the issue of policy and what's going to happen to the different states as they indeed get their own power or their own power to control their policies and markets from distribution, transmission, and generation, of course. But I leave you with this quote. Energy is not just a necessity. It's the backbone of economic transformation. Without stable power, industrialization remains a dream. And this quote is by our very own Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the DG of World Trade Organization. And if you hear that loud and clear, it's indeed very informative. There's nothing we can achieve, even as we try to grow the economy, without solving the issue of power. It's completely impossible. So a lot of focus should be on how are we solving the issue of power in Nigeria and getting Nigerians to 24/7 power supply. That's why we have the Energy Outlook, and that's why we have me here every week bringing you some of the conversations and letting you know what's indeed going to happen. Next week, we'll continue our conversation, but in case you missed it in our breaking news, SPDC, after 70 years, has now exited its onshore and now moving fully to offshore. That's why we'll leave the conversations. That's the breaking news as Renaissance has bought over the company, completely its transaction for that. So thank you so much. In case you want to watch this again, you can continue this on our YouTube channel at Official Upgrade TV. In case you missed the conversation, you can have a replay quickly on our channel. But thank you so much. My name is Wisdom Chap Jumbo, and this is the Energy Outlook. Until next week, same time, same station. Don't miss it.